We're going to delve into the digital world stream now, and we do have a couple of excellent speakers lined up over the next hour or so as we delve into analytics, data collection, and digital currencies. So we're going to kick off with a look at future-proofing. Swift has done some analysis of global trends in payments infrastructure development. So please welcome Swift's Commercial Director of Oceania, Kees Middendorp.
Thank you, Nadine. Thanks for getting my name correct. It's a name that I often trip over myself. Just a quick 1-minute introduction to me. I'm Commercial Director for Swift for Oceania. What that basically means is that I'm tasked with expanding our footprint throughout this sub-region. So I look after signing up new banks, non-bank FIs, also corporate entities and government entities. What I'd like to talk to you about today is I guess basically providing an analysis on payment market infrastructures, having a look at some trends that we're seeing, and I think there is actually a fair amount of overlap in what you've just heard Chris and Paul speak about, but also from Leo's presentation yesterday. So I might go fairly quickly through the two middle points. Now ISO 20022 is a standard. I'm well aware that if there's a topic that's going to put someone to sleep, it's standards. So I'm going to try and demystify it a little bit. So you actually understand what people are talking about when you hear that buzzword. Having a quick look at real-time payment systems and the trends that we're seeing, or I guess the features that we're seeing in real-time payment systems throughout the world. And then a look more in depth at the New Zealand payment system, specifically your low-value payment system, and giving you some suggestions on how it could actually be expanded to adopt some of those trends. Now I always like to start with a quick intro slide on Swift. And I'll do that because Swift is a bit of a unique organisation. It's a not-for-profit cooperative. It's been around for around 40 years. It is in essence a communication infrastructure organisation. And it's got a couple of really core elements to it. And the first is that it provides an incredibly secure financial messaging service. The second is that it acts as a financial standardisation body. So we've been in standards since our inception. I'll speak a little more about that. Now, I think it's easy to make a throwaway comment like Bitcoin will replace Swift. But I suspect that people don't understand exactly how broad Swift services are. So we are very deeply integrated in the payments market, but we do an awful lot more than that. We provide services to payment market infrastructures, to securities in market infrastructures. Over 50% of our messaging, or just under 50% actually, is actually related to the securities market. We have trade finance messaging. We support corporates on Swift. We have over 10,000 members on Swift at the moment, and underneath that we suspect there are several 100,000 more underlying entities that don't have a specific address on the network, spread over 212 countries. In Asia Pacific we have around 10 offices. In New Zealand we unfortunately don't have an office. We're based over in Sydney as the nearest country. We've had a relationship in New Zealand for around 30 years, so we provide support for some of your most critical market infrastructures. The RTGS system for your high-value payments, the low-value payment system, the SBI, and also for NZ Clear. Now, we also provide services, obviously, for cross-border payments. Your bank sending international payments are doing so via Swift. Corporate connectivity. So a number of fairly well-known corporates in New Zealand, Fonterra, Fisher & Paykel, Kiwi Rail, have been connected to Swift for a number of years, or Fisher & Paykel for around 12 months, and they're using Swift to communicate with their banks. We support trade instruments, trade finance, also a fair amount of use in the New Zealand market, and treasury messages as well. Now, in the context of payment market infrastructures, we provide support for a significant number of payment market infrastructures. And this might be fairly similar in a way to one of the slides I think that Leo actually presented. So you can see the scale on the top right-hand corner. Those countries that are in grey have high-value payment systems that are based on Swift. Those that are in blue are low-value payment systems, and those that are in purple have a combination of both. So in the right-hand side on your screens, you can see Asia Pacific. Those that are live on Swift, Australia and New Zealand have both their high-value and low-value payment systems running on Swift. Brunei recently went live, I think, with their high-value payment system. That was in the last week or two. So in total, 75 high-value payment systems, 29 low-value payment systems, and some significant volumes being pumped through both. Moving on to ISO 20022. Now, I normally stumble over that, so I'm going to call it ISO. We were established in 1973. We created a format called FIN, which just stands for Financial Messaging back then. Now, it was built to replace a paper-based mechanism, so the telex. It used a proprietary syntax, so it was built by Swift for use specifically over the Swift network. I think at that point in time, it probably had the ability to contain the data that was needed, but as time has passed, the data requirements from consumers, from banks, has changed, and we often find that the FIN messaging doesn't have the ability to contain all of the information that's needed, especially from a remittance point of view. Very rigid standard. Now, the move to ISO 20022, ISO, came around 10 years ago. It was established initially to replace FIN, and I think that's still the intention. I don't know when. Certainly we recognise that the amount of investment in FIN integration is significant enough that we're not going to force the industry, and in fact I think we'll be driven by the industry when it's ready for them to move. It is built based on electronic messaging. So it uses a language, and sorry for getting technical here, but called XML, Extensible Markup Language. Now, XML itself has a couple of benefits. And the first is that it's an open source neutral syntax, so anyone can create this standard in effect. Swift is the registrar for 20022, so organisations external to Swift can come and register the usage of the ISO messaging and then use it externally to Swift, so it doesn't have to run over Swift. Two of the most important points, I think, from a payment market infrastructure point of view, or from a payment point of view, are that it supports a much, much richer data content. It's a much longer field for remittance data, which is incredibly important to your corporate and your corporates and your consumers, especially from a reconciliation point of view. And it is extensible, and that means that it can be easily expanded. It's designed to be expanded. It is also a methodology. That basically means that we can set a standard usage, if you like, at, for example, a market level, and they'll then drill down and have individual iterations all the way down to the bilateral level if needed. So you could have a bank with a fairly large corporate customer having their own design of ISO 20022. This is just to give you an idea. I mean, it's easy to talk about these standards, but to actually get an idea of what they might look like. Neither are especially attractive, so thank heavens they're machine readable. But the one on the right is 20022 based. So if you ever you want to visualise what we're talking about, think about something that looks like that. Now, from an ISO adoption point of view, and this again I think is very similar to a slide that Leo presented, these are the countries that have adopted or are talking about adopting ISO for their market infrastructures, their payment market infrastructures. Those in orange are low-value systems. Those in red are high-value systems. And those with a burnt browny orangey colour are hybrids. Now you have New Zealand down there already using ISO 20022 in their SBI system. It's only a very small portion of the messaging content that's used, and it's typically between the RBNZ and the participants. See other countries there. SEPA is one that's recently moved to 20022, or relatively recently. And Australia, as we heard before, the NPP looking at a move to 20022. So real-time payment systems. This gives you an idea over time of how the payment systems have actually evolved. Now on the bottom axis you have time criticality, so we're talking about batches or single payments. And on the left-hand side you have the size of the payment, whether it's a high-value transaction or whether it's a low-value transaction. And the first iteration of these systems that we saw many, many years ago was a deferred net settlement system. So it catered for high-value payments but in a batched process. We then moved on to low-value, so ACH, which stands for Automated Clearinghouse. Still fairly common, still operating in a batch mode. Then the introduction of real-time gross settlement systems. And this is really Swift's core position today. As you saw before, we are supporting around 75 payment market infrastructures for RTGS. And now more recently, although perhaps not so recently, and I wasn't aware of Japan having something in the 1970s, the real-time low-value payment system, which is looking at bulk pay or single payments, I should say, but lower value payments on a real-time basis. They're not all the same. Of the 20 or so systems that are out there, there are certainly some similarities, which I'll discuss, but there are also some differences. So we're seeing some systems that are hybrid. You've got a core infrastructure that's actually operating both an RTGS and a real-time payment system. There are also those that still run in multiple batches. So from a consumer point of view, you might be seeing real-time clearing and posting, but the settlement is run in batches, and that's still a very valid way of doing it. So the primary characteristics, and there's a little bit of double up. I think we heard Chris speaking about some, or Paul rather, speaking about some of these. Availability, the payments must be sent, or must have the ability to be sent and received at all times of the day, every day of the year. Payments must be processed immediately and must be irrevocable. There must be an element of real-time settlement risk mitigation. So you can either be talking about real-time settlement or batched settlement, but with fairly short windows, which means from a consumer point of view, you're still seeing immediate payments, but the settlement risk is mitigated. A move towards ISO 20022, significantly for the remittance data component. Universal addressing. So the use of identifiers, I think Leo called them proxies, like an email address or a mobile phone number or anything else that organisations will use, instead of account numbers. Basically making the payment initiation for consumers much simpler. So the access regime, this is actually an important one. Lower access costs and barriers to entry for new participants. When organisations or when market infrastructures and regulators move to having a low-value payment system, one of the things they really seek to do is to create an infrastructure that will allow competition and innovation. And they do so by having a system that will be open with lower access costs and much lower barriers of entry, and allows new participants to enter the market. Service layers. We heard Paul and I think Chris talk about this. The separation of, I guess, the core infrastructure, the core processing infrastructure, with the commercial overlays, as they're called, which will allow things like P2P mobile payment services to be appended to the top of the core infrastructure. Now this slide shows the evolution of real-time high-value payment systems, so RTGS systems, from the 1980s, when I think they were first established, although someone out there probably knows of earlier ones that we weren't aware of, up until present day. Now the grey line, and we're talking about the top graph here with the red or the orange, the top line in grey indicates the number of countries that are on or that have RTGS systems. So we're talking roughly around 100 today. SWIFT entered the market in the early 1990s, so we're the purple line, and from that point on, we tended to see that most RTGS systems were based on SWIFT infrastructure. So at that point, we were able to see that there was a reason for standardisation. There were enough similar components in the different systems that we could come in and do what we do best, standardise, and offer systems that could be reused. In terms of the phase, you see innovators in the early 1980s, early adopters in the 1990s. We're presently at the laggard stage, not perhaps the most pleasant term, but it relates to organisations we're seeing in less developed, or I should say less developed countries rather, that are looking at real-time payment systems. And we heard Kerry yesterday talking about the RFI that's been sent out by four of the Pacific Island banks for an automated transfer system, one component of which is an RTGS system. Now on the bottom graph, hopefully you can see that, it might be too low for some of you, that is an identification of where we're at in the low-value payments, the real-time low-value payment system space. I think in modern-day form, they've been around since 2004. As yet, SWIFT hasn't made a play in this space. I don't think it's any secret that we submitted a tender for the NPP for the basic infrastructure. An announcement hasn't been made yet, so regardless of whether we are successful or not, this is a space that you will see SWIFT in. We've made a strategic decision because we see enough standardisation, enough standardisation, the points that I spoke about in the previous slide, areas that we can come in and create something that is capable of being reused by other countries for us to want to be playing in this space now. Early adoption phase, so fingers crossed we start seeing a purple line on that graph shortly. I had a quick slide up here on the NPP. I don't know that I'll spend much time on it, given the previous two presentations. What I would focus on, though, is the strategic objectives of the RBA on the right-hand side of the slide. Same-day settlements for direct entry, that was achieved in the current low-value payment system last year. Real-time payments and immediate availability, more complete remittance data with payments, payments outside normal banking hours, so 24/7, and easier payment addressing mechanisms. So you can see the NPP objectives are very much along the lines of what we've seen in many of the other systems that are out there. So now I'd like to spend some time on the current system in New Zealand, the SBI system. This is a moving parts diagram which shows how it actually works. It's putting a bit of context to the next few slides. So you've got some participants here. On the left-hand side, you have a sending bank. On the right-hand side, a receiving bank. Down the bottom, the RBNZ, and in the middle is SWIFT. So the sending bank sends a file that's currently in the BACO format of bulk payments. Now, in the header of that file is a settlement instruction. So that is sent to the receiver. SWIFT actually holds that file, pending authorisation by the RBNZ. We extract the settlement information and send it to the RBNZ for processing. Now, at this point, the RBNZ sends an ISO 20022 message back to the sender and receiver to advise that the transaction is on queue. They perform their settlement processing, and upon successful settlement, the RBNZ then sends an authorisation to SWIFT to release the payment file to the receiver and to send a notification to the sender. So that's very simply how the SBI system works currently. Settlement before interchange, your low-value payment system. Now, considerations for payments evolution in New Zealand, and this is very much in line with what you've heard other people speak about, the trends. ISO 20022, is there a need, does the industry have a need to migrate away from BACO to 20022? Probably specifically around the remittance data capabilities. Would you do it in with a phased approach or in a big bang? And could you do it within the SBI system, or would you need to build a new system from the ground up? From a faster payments perspective, is real-time payments something the New Zealand industry needs? Would you do something similar to the MPP? And again, would it mean that you need to build a new system? Or would you be able to reuse the SBI system or potentially the RTGS system? And from an addressing point of view, would that simplification be a benefit to the industry in using something like a mobile or email address? And would it help facilitate bank portability, which I know has been a point of discussion in New Zealand? So I guess our suggestion would look at something by way of a voluntary approach, where a couple of participating banks, and perhaps those with large corporate customers that have reconciliation issues because of the limited amount of data that can currently be contained within the BACO format, would say, yes, we put up our hands, we'd like to start using ISO 20022. Now, we see that usage being fairly simple. It could be done in a phased approach. And I guess one of the key benefits to this is that because the bulk payment, the file itself, the RBNZ is agnostic as to whether it's in BACO format or in 20022 format, because all they see is the settlement information which is extracted from the header. They don't see the file content. So you can have an instance where you've got the SBI participant up the top on the left with their back office function being extended out to be able to integrate with 20022. They can still send BACO format files to some banks. They can send 20022 format files to other banks. The SwiftNet header is unchanged, so it's the same for both. And as I said before, from the perspective of the RBNZ, there's no change. Now, that said, there is work to be done on the banking side, the participant side, because they would need to enable their systems to be 20022 capable. There's a benefit there in the use or the fact that 20022 is based on XML, because it's a much easier language to integrate with. From our perspective, it's also quite simple. We'd set up a new service on SwiftNet to allow for the segregation of the two formats. Subscribers to the new service could be a subset, or it could be all participants. It doesn't matter to us. And as I said before, settlement instructions to the RBNZ could be identical. Looking at faster payments. The SBI's main purpose when it was established was to remove settlement risk from the New Zealand payment system. Now, since go live, the number of files being exchanged, the number of file exchanges, I should say, has increased. I think there's a minimum of 5 settlement windows at the moment, whereas some banks are actually exchanging on an hourly basis. And we heard yesterday the Deputy Governor of the Reserve Bank saying that by 2016 they want all banks to be sending or for exchanging files on an hourly basis. Now that's certainly going some of the way to achieving a faster payments outcome, but by no means is it a real-time 24/7 payment system. So I guess there's a question that needs to be asked as well, if that step change is enough to future-proof New Zealand's payment system. If not, then the next step would be to introduce a real-time clearing system. And this would give it the real-time element. Participating banks could agree to post funds immediately, and this is important because from a consumer perspective, this is where the real-time element comes into play. Immediately into account, and then do regular settlements through the SBI or through the RTGS system, so reusing what you've already got. We think it could be done without an automated clearinghouse, which is basically a central hub, because you've got a fairly small market with a limited number of participants. A point-to-point model will work quite well. Point-to-point means that you've got 2 participants exchanging files between them. Settlement risk, as I said before, could be limited or eliminated through short settlement windows. I guess there's also a question about the practical limitations of the RBNZ's ability to settle quickly and how regularly they can actually settle throughout the day. But can be eliminated through other things as well, like limits and caps. There would also need to be an extension in the operating hours that the SBI operates for it to be able to operate on a 24/7 basis. Addressing, being aware of time, I've got a 1 second left, so very quickly on this slide. I think probably fairly familiar with addressing, simply a lookup database that would be embedded in the clearing system by which a mobile phone number and email address will be linked with accountant, branch or BSB numbers. When you're initiating a payment or you're doing a sending to an email address in the clearing system, there's a link there so that the actual account details are used. My last slide, technical, I'm sorry. But it gives you an idea of how everything comes together. So on the left-hand side, you have the orderers participant bank. You've got a number of different streams through which payments can actually be made. So you've got your branch, you've got your phone, internet, services, applications, whatever else might be added. You've got their SWIFT gateway, so their connection into the SWIFT network, and that is replicated on the other side, the other participant's bank. In the purple, you've got your current settlement systems, your SBI or RTGS systems, and down the bottom you've got the RBNZ. Now the bit that we've just suggested is the inclusion of a new clearing layer or new clearing mechanism that would use an addressing database that's embedded in that system that would operate 24/7 on a point-to-point clearing network, so bilaterally, using ISO 20022. So that's a way we see this coming together for New Zealand, the New Zealand industry to be able to enhance what they have already and extend out to adopt some of the features that we're seeing in global payment systems. Up for debate, it's just our suggestion. It may be something that the industry likes or doesn't like. Anyway, I'd like to thank you for your time. That's all from me.
I do have an eye on the clock, but any questions for Kees? Yes.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about ISO 20022 and XML pros and cons, but instead I'm going to pick up on your opening about Bitcoin could replace SWIFT. I'm not saying it will. And the statement comes from Gottfried Liebrandt, who runs SWIFT.
That's awkward.
It's awkward because it isn't just payments and currencies. It does security settlement. It can do any structure you want it to do on the blockchain protocol, which is the technology. And what came out of Cybos this year, for example, is the launch of a new company called Coloured Coins, which will actually provide a security settlement capability on the blockchain using that technology. So what's actually happening, and the good side from SWIFT, is that under Lazaro and now Gottfried, you have Inner Tribe, which has incorporated and embraced all of the aspects of the new emerging capabilities of these technologies, including Ripple and colored coins and eToro and lots of other capabilities, and are looking at how to incorporate that into the secure, resilient messaging structures that Swift offers. So on the one hand, it's the danger of dismissing things as just a payments mechanism when you need to really get into the depths of these things that are emerging before they become something that's biting you in the bum.
All right, a fair point. I was probably a little defensive at the beginning, but I think that there are other components, and certainly Swift has taken an interest. Absolutely, you're correct. It's on our radar. But there are a lot of other elements that I think that are core to Swift that will differentiate it from any type of cryptocurrency, and specifically security, for example. It's, in effect, we're also a security company. Everything we have, we put into ensuring that our network is highly available and highly secure. Something to consider.
All right. Thank you very much, Kees.
Thank you.